Get that woman away from me. People like her don't belong in first class. Victoria. Kensington's voice slashed through the cabin like a serrated knife, causing conversations to halt instantly. She jabbed her finger toward the composed black woman seated beside her, who hadn't even looked up from her medical documents. The flight attendant's eyes widened in shock as other passengers turned to stare. The cabin suddenly went silent except for the soft hum of engines. No one moved. No one intervened. What happens when raw entitlement collides with true excellence at 30,000 feet? When a luxury cabin becomes the battlefield for a confrontation that will change lives forever? The Global Atlantic Airways first-class section froze in that terrible moment. A woman of immense privilege demanding the removal of someone she deemed unworthy based on nothing but appearance. A medical pioneer who'd saved hundreds of children's lives being treated like an intruder. In exactly 12 minutes, everyone on this plane would witness something none would ever forget. The moment when power shifted in midair and truth prevailed with stunning consequences. Before we dive deeper, where are you watching from? Drop your city below. And if you believe everyone deserves dignity regardless of what they look like, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, what happens next isn't just satisfying. It's justice served at altitude. Now let's step aboard Global Atlantic Flight 237 from New York to Geneva, where an ordinary Thursday is about to become extraordinary in ways no one could have predicted. Dr. Amara Okafor moved through JFK's Terminal 4 with quiet purpose while chaos swirled around her. Other passengers checked phones, frantically complained about delays, or jostled for position at coffee stands. Dr. Okafor simply walked, unhurried, yet deliberate, the practiced stride of someone who operated with surgical precision in every aspect of life. At 42, she had revolutionized pediatric neurosurgery. Her innovative techniques for accessing previously inoperable brainstem tumors had slashed mortality rates by 42% globally. The Okafor method, as it was now known in medical schools worldwide, had given thousands of children second chances at life. Her appearance was elegantly understated. She wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that emphasized her athletic frame without drawing attention. Her natural hair was styled in elegant locks that framed intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Unlike many first-class travelers around her, she wore minimal jewelry, just a simple watch and small gold earrings that had belonged to her mother. Her weathered leather briefcase, expensive but practical, had accompanied her through countless hospitals across 6 continents. "Boarding pass, please," the gate agent said without looking up. Amara handed over her document. The agent's eyes flickered with brief surprise before professionalism reasserted itself. "Thank you, Dr. Okafor. Enjoy your flight." The past 72 hours had been grueling even by her standards. 2 complex surgeries, one on a 3-year-old with a congenital malformation previously deemed fatal, another on an infant with a rare tumor wrapped around critical brain structures. Both children would now have futures. Both surgeries had lasted over 14 hours. Then came budget meetings, where she'd successfully secured funding for additional pediatric beds despite administrative resistance. Now she was heading to Geneva to deliver the keynote at the International Health Summit, where she would announce breakthrough findings that could reshape pediatric neurosurgery globally. Her presentation notes needed final review. The 8-hour flight represented precious preparation time. As she walked down the jetway, her mind briefly wandered to her childhood in Baltimore, Mrs. Kennedy, her 7th-grade teacher, appeared from memory's shadows. "Medical school. For you." The woman had laughed. "Be realistic, Amara. Maybe aim for something more attainable. Not everyone is cut out to be a doctor." 28 years later, those dismissive words still carried their sting. But now they fueled rather than limited her. Each time someone underestimated her based on appearance, it simply strengthened her resolve to excel beyond any possible doubt. The flight attendant at the aircraft door smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Okafor, 2B is on your right." "Thank you," Amara replied with genuine appreciation for the simple respect. She moved efficiently to her pod-style seat, arranging her workspace with the same precision she brought to operating rooms. Presentation notes to the left, journal articles to the right, tablet positioned for easy reference. Her movements were economical, refined by years, in environments where wasted motion could have devastating consequences. From her window, she watched ground crews scurrying across the tarmac. It reminded her of her surgical teams, each person essential, each role vital to successful outcomes. She'd never been one to believe her position as surgeon made her more valuable than the nurse who anticipated her needs or the anesthesiologist who kept patients stable. Excellence was always collective. Amara closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself this small moment of calm before productive hours ahead. Her revolutionary surgical approach had initially been dismissed by senior colleagues as too ambitious, too risky. Now it was being implemented worldwide, saving children previously considered beyond help. "Would you like a pre-departure beverage?" Dr. Okafor, a flight attendant, asked. "Just water, please." "Thank you." She opened her tablet and began reviewing slides. "The key isn't just technical precision," she whispered to herself. "Practicing. It's believing every child deserves the same chance at life regardless of where they were born or what resources their family has." Her focus was so complete that she didn't notice the commotion building at the front of the cabin. Only when the sharp voice cut through her concentration did she look up, noticing for the first time the woman who would become her unwelcome adversary for the next 8 hours. Victoria Kensington swept into first class like a hurricane in human form, demanding attention while pretending not to seek it. At 56, she had perfected the art of making an entrance that established dominance without appearing to try. Her platinum blonde hair pulled back in a chignon so tight it seemed to function as an impromptu facelift. The harsh style emphasized her surgically maintained features, the kind that whispered of regular visits to discreet clinics where doctors didn't advertise and clients paid in cash. Her stark white pantsuit probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, a deliberate choice that proclaimed both status and impracticality. Who but the truly privileged could risk wearing white while traveling? Multiple gold bracelets jangled at her wrists, catching light with each imperious gesture. Her makeup was flawless, applied with the precision of someone who had long ago memorized her best angles and knew exactly how to leverage them. "Excuse me," she called sharply to a passing attendant. "This Birkin needs to go in the closet, not overhead. It's worth more than you'll make this year." The young attendant flushed. "Of course, ma'am. I'll take care of it right away." Victoria didn't bother with thanks. In her world, gratitude was unnecessary when people simply performed their designated functions. She checked her Patek Philippe watch, impatiently mentally calculating how this flight would position her for tomorrow's pharmaceutical conference. What no one in the cabin could see was the tension Victoria carried beneath her composed exterior. Just yesterday, Biocorp had lost a major government contract to a rival company, led by a younger black executive, a woman who had once been Victoria's subordinate. They only chose her for diversity points, Victoria had complained to her husband over breakfast. His silence had spoken volumes about what he really thought. Their marriage had grown increasingly strained as Victoria's behavior had become more entitled with each promotion. 3 decades into marriage, Richard Kensington had begun to wonder if the ambitious woman he'd fallen for had been replaced by someone he barely recognized, someone whose need for status had eclipsed everything else. "Mrs. Kensington, lovely to see you again," said Michael Torres, the senior flight attendant who recognized her from previous flights. "Your usual champagne before takeoff." "Michael, thank goodness. At least someone competent is working today." She cast a dismissive glance toward the junior attendant who had taken her bag. "That one seems completely overwhelmed. Is this her first day?" "Sophia is fairly new, but doing wonderfully," Michael replied diplomatically. "I'll get your champagne right away." Victoria scanned the cabin with practiced efficiency, mentally categorizing every passenger, potential business contacts, competitors, and irrelevant backgrounds. Her gaze stopped abruptly when she noted her assigned seat. 2A, directly next to a black woman, focused intently on a tablet. A flicker of displeasure crossed her face. She had grown accustomed to having an empty seat beside her on these premium flights. The executives who could afford these tickets were overwhelmingly from her demographic, and she preferred it that way. Conversation was easier when people shared background, education, and cultural references. Deep down, a small voice, perhaps the last remnant of the idealistic young woman she'd once been, whispered that her reaction was shameful. Victoria quickly silenced it, as she always did when confronted with her own prejudices. She wasn't racist, she told herself. She simply had standards. "Here's your champagne." "Mrs. Kensington," Michael said, returning with a flute of golden liquid. "Thank you," Victoria replied, her eyes still fixed on her seat neighbor. "Has there been a mistake with the seating arrangement? I usually have more space." Michael glanced toward Dr. Okafor, then back to Victoria. "We're at full capacity in first class today, but I assure you the seats are quite spacious." Victoria took a slow sip of champagne, a plan already forming. Over the years, she had perfected the art of getting what she wanted without explicitly stating her prejudices. It was all about pressure applied in just the right places. "I suppose it will have to do," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Standards really aren't what they used to be, are they?" As she approached her seat, Victoria made a mental note of the woman's appearance. Natural hair, navy suit, no flashy labels. Probably some diversity hire headed to a conference where they needed to check boxes she thought dismissively, completely missing the subtle indicators of true excellence before her. Victoria settled into 2A with a deliberate sigh, ensuring her presence was felt. The armrest between them became an immediate territory to be claimed. She placed her champagne on the shared console, letting her diamond rings catch the light. "This flight better not be delayed," she announced to no one in particular. "Some of us have actual important meetings in Geneva." As she spoke, that small voice inside her winced again at what she was becoming. For just a moment, Victoria remembered her own early career struggles, the times she'd been dismissed or overlooked. But that flash of self-awareness vanished as quickly as it appeared, submerged beneath decades of carefully cultivated entitlement. The first-class cabin of Global Atlantic Airways Flight 237 represented the pinnacle of commercial air travel luxury. Each of the 16 pod-style seats cost upward of $14,000 for the one-way journey from New York to Geneva. The cabin was designed to make passengers forget they were inside a metal tube hurtling through the stratosphere at 550 miles per hour. Ambient lighting in soft blues and purples mimicked a perpetual, elegant dusk. Classical music, Debussy's Clair de Lune, played at precisely the right volume to soothe but not distract. The air was scented faintly with the airline's signature fragrance, a subtle blend of sandalwood and citrus developed by a French perfumer exclusively for Global Atlantic. Each pod featured hand-stitched leather seating that converted to a fully flat bed with memory foam padding calibrated for optimal comfort. Privacy screens could be raised or lowered depending on passenger preference. The entertainment screens were 24 inches. Larger than many home televisions, with noise-canceling Bose headphones provided in their own dedicated compartment. The cabin's exclusivity wasn't just in its physical amenities, but in its atmosphere. The space whispered of privilege of membership in an unspoken club where concerns about cost were considered gauche. Here, even the wealthiest passengers were expected to maintain a certain decorum, a refined appreciation for luxury that didn't require acknowledgement. Overseeing this rarefied environment were 3 crew members, each with distinct roles and personalities that would prove crucial in the events to unfold. Michael Torres, the 48-year-old senior flight attendant, had mastered the art of service without servitude over his 20-year career. His silver-flecked dark hair and trim physique spoke of someone who maintained high personal standards. He prided himself on memorizing the preferences of regular premium passengers: Mrs. Wilson's extra blanket, Mr. Tanaka's specific brand of tea, Mrs. Kensington's champagne before takeoff, and precisely 40 minutes after reaching cruising altitude. Michael's approach to conflict was simple: de-escalate, accommodate, and above all, protect the airline's relationship with its highest-paying customers. His evaluations consistently praised his ability to transform potentially negative situations into opportunities for service recovery. Corporate speak for giving entitled passengers whatever they wanted to avoid complaints. Yet beneath this polished professional exterior, Michael harbored growing discomfort with how often service recovery meant accommodating behavior that crossed ethical lines. Just last month, he'd moved a Middle Eastern family from first class after a white executive expressed security concerns. The incident had left him with a lingering sense of shame he couldn't quite shake. Sofia Alvarez, at 26, was still learning the choreography of first-class service. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform pressed to perfection. What she lacked in experience, she made up for in genuine warmth and acute observation. Where Michael saw passenger preferences, Sofia saw people, their anxieties, their kindnesses, their prejudices. 3 months into the job, she was already developing a reputation for anticipating needs before they were expressed. She'd also witnessed enough to recognize the patterns of who received immediate attention and who was subtly made to wait, who was addressed by name, and who wasn't. These observations troubled her deeply. Sofia had grown up watching her immigrant parents work service jobs where they'd swallowed their dignity daily. "Never let them make you forget you're human," her mother had told her. That advice sat uncomfortably alongside the airline's training. The customer experience is paramount. Gabriel Martinez, the 50-year-old purser, held ultimate authority in the cabin. His 2 decades with Global Atlantic had coincided with the industry's transformation, from the golden age of service to the nickel-and-dime era, and now to this strange bifurcated world where economy passengers were squeezed while first class became ever more luxurious. He ran his cabin by the book, believing that clear procedures were the foundation of both safety and satisfaction. With retirement just 5 years away, Gabriel had mastered the art of diplomatic invisibility. He appeared when needed, vanished when not, and treated every passenger with identical professional courtesy, regardless of their behavior. As passengers settled in the cabin, hummed with quiet activity. The sound of ice clinking in crystal glasses mingled with hushed conversations and the soft click of laptop keys. In economy, boarding continued with its familiar controlled chaos. But here in first class, the process was choreographed to maintain an illusion of effortless exclusivity. Yet beneath this cultivated tranquility, invisible currents were already forming. Michael noticed Victoria Kensington's expression when she saw Dr. Okafor. Sofia observed how Dr. Okafor arranged her workspace with methodical precision. Gabriel made mental notes of potential friction points: the shared armrest between 2A and 2B, the slightly delayed departure time, the full cabin with no flexibility for reseating. None of them could have predicted how these minor observations would converge into the perfect storm that was about to engulf Flight 237. Victoria Kensington turned boarding into performance art. She extracted antibacterial wipes from her designer purse and began methodically cleaning every surface within reach: the seat controls, the entertainment screen, the tray table. Her movements were theatrical, designed to be noticed by surrounding passengers. "You'd think for what they charge," she remarked to nobody yet, "everybody they could at least maintain proper hygiene standards." She wrinkled her nose. "One never knows what germs are lurking, especially these days." When she reached the armrest between their seats, Victoria's wiping became almost comically vigorous. She stopped precisely at the invisible boundary between her space and Dr. Okafor's, creating what appeared to be a sanitized, demilitarized zone. Dr. Okafor continued reviewing her presentation notes, seemingly oblivious to the performance beside her. Her focus remained unbroken, her expression neutral. She shifted her elbow slightly to avoid contact with Victoria's cleaning frenzy, but otherwise gave no indication she had noticed. This lack of reaction appeared to irritate Victoria more than any protest might have. She cleared her throat pointedly, then sighed when no response came. Finally, she accidentally knocked her elbow against Dr. Okafor's tablet. "Oh," Victoria exclaimed with transparent insincerity. "I'm so sorry. These seats are just so cramped, aren't they? Even in first class, it seems they're packing us in like sardines these days." Dr. Okafor glanced up briefly. "No problem at all," she replied with calm professionalism before returning to her work. The quiet dignity of her response only seemed to irritate Victoria further. Across the aisle, Thomas Walker, a 60-year-old banking executive who had collaborated with Victoria on pharmaceutical investment deals, caught her eye and gave a small nod of solidarity. This silent acknowledgement emboldened Victoria, confirming her belief that others shared her discomfort. In row 3, Jordan Reynolds adjusted his glasses and discreetly angled his phone to capture the interaction. As a documentary filmmaker focusing on social power dynamics, he had developed an instinct for recognizing moments pregnant with potential. Something about the contrast between these two women, one loudly asserting territory, the other quietly maintaining her ground, triggered his professional curiosity. "Interesting," he whispered to himself. "Classic dominance display meets quiet resistance." Behind him, Daniela Morales observed with the trained eye of a civil rights attorney. She noted how the flight attendants responded differently to each woman. Michael's solicitous attention to Victoria versus the perfunctory professionalism shown to Dr. Okafor. After 15 years of litigating discrimination cases, Daniela could recognize the subtle patterns that often preceded more explicit conflicts. Another day, another battle for space that should belong to everyone, she thought, reaching for her notebook. Old habits died hard. She still documented potential discrimination even when off duty. "Mrs. Kensington, would you like a magazine or newspaper before takeoff?" Michael asked, leaning into her field of vision. "The Financial Times." "If you have it," Victoria replied, then added with performative concern, "and perhaps you could ask this person to put away her computer during takeoff. I believe that's still regulation, isn't it?" Michael turned toward Dr. Okafor, his tone shifting subtly. "Ma'am, I'll need to ask you to stow your electronic devices until we reach cruising altitude." "Of course," Dr. Okafor replied, saving her document and powering down her tablet. "And it's Dr. Okafor." A flicker of recognition crossed Michael's face, quickly replaced by his professional mask. "My apologies, Dr. Okafor. Can I get you anything before departure?" "No, thank you. I'm fine." Victoria observed this exchange with narrowed eyes, noting the shift in Michael's demeanor. The courtesy title clearly irritated her, as did the implication of education and authority it carried. Doctor of what she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Dr. Okafor to hear. "Basket weaving. Everyone's a doctor these days." Dr. Okafor didn't respond to the bait. Instead, she placed her noise-canceling headphones over her ears, creating a bubble of peace around herself. Her expression remained serene, but those watching closely might have noticed the slight tension in her shoulders. The practiced composure of someone who had navigated similar situations countless times before. An elderly couple in matching cashmere sweaters settled into 4A and 4B, whispering to each other as they observed Victoria's behavior. The husband shook his head slightly in disapproval while his wife pursed her lips. "Some people never learn to play nicely with others," the woman whispered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Her husband patted her hand. "Shh, Margaret. Not our circus, not our monkeys." Sophia approached with Victoria's requested newspaper. "Here's the Financial Times, Mrs. Kensington. We'll be departing shortly." Finally, Victoria muttered, taking the paper without acknowledgement. The service on this airline has gone completely downhill. Sophia's smile remained in place, but her eyes flickered briefly toward Dr. Okafor with something like apology. It was a small gesture of solidarity, invisible to Victoria but noted by Jordan Reynolds, who continued documenting the unfolding dynamic. As the cabin door closed with a definitive thunk, a strange tension had settled over first class. Not yet a current, barely even a ripple, but present nonetheless. Dr. Okafor gazed out at the tarmac operations, mentally reviewing her keynote points. Victoria rustled her newspaper with unnecessary force, occasionally glancing sideways at her seat neighbor with barely concealed disapproval. Flight 237 prepared for departure, unaware it was carrying not just passengers and cargo, but the ingredients for a confrontation that would soon reverberate far beyond its pressurized walls. The aircraft reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign chimed off. Victoria Kensington made her first calculated move. As she reached for her water glass, her elbow accidentally knocked against Dr. Okafor's tablet, sending droplets across its screen. "Goodness," Victoria exclaimed with theatrical surprise that didn't reach her eyes. "How terribly clumsy of me. These seats are just so confining." Dr. Okafor calmly reached for a napkin and wiped her device dry. "No harm done," she responded without looking up, her voice even. Victoria's lips tightened at the lack of reaction. She had expected annoyance, perhaps even a flash of anger that would validate her growing internal narrative about her seat neighbor. Instead, she received composed neutrality, which somehow irritated her even more. Michael began the first-class service, distributing warm towels and taking meal orders with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Kensington, would you like to start with our caviar service?" he asked. Victoria brightened, seeing an opportunity to display her connoisseur's knowledge. "Is it the Russian ossetra like last month, or that inferior Iranian substitute?" she inquired loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. "It's the ossetra, ma'am. I made sure of it. And the Krug, I presume? Not the Dom Perignon. It gives me a headache." She pronounced the French names with exaggerated accuracy. "Certainly, Mrs. Kensington." When Michael turned to Dr. Okafor, his demeanor subtly shifted, still professional but less deferential. "Doctor, would you care for the appetizer?" "Just the main course, thank you. The grilled salmon, please." "Very good. And to drink, water is fine." Victoria made a small sound, not quite a scoff, but close. "Really? All these premium options, and you choose water, I suppose. Not everyone appreciates fine dining." The comment was designed to provoke, to establish Victoria's superior taste and Dr. Okafor's presumed lack of refinement. Several nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Dr. Okafor returned to reviewing complex brain scans from her most recent pediatric case. Under her breath, she murmured technical terminology as she made notes. "Possible optic pathway, glioma requiring temporal approach." Victoria's head snapped toward her. "What did you just say?" Dr. Okafor looked up momentarily, confused. "I beg your pardon." "You're muttering to yourself?" Victoria accused. "It's disturbing. And what language is that supposed to be?" "I'm reviewing medical terminology for my presentation," Dr. Okafor explained calmly. "I apologize if it disturbed you." Victoria's eyes narrowed skeptically. "Medical terminology. That sounded like complete gibberish to me. Are you feeling all right? You seem agitated." The implication hung in the air, sharp and toxic. Several passengers turned to observe the interaction more closely. Jordan Reynolds subtly adjusted his phone to better capture the exchange. "I assure you I'm perfectly well," Dr. Okafor replied, maintaining her composure. "I'm a neurosurgeon preparing for a keynote address." Victoria's eyebrows rose in theatrical disbelief. A neurosurgeon. How fascinating. Her tone suggested it was anything but believable. From across the aisle, Thomas Walker chuckled lightly, sharing in Victoria's implied skepticism. The sound encouraged her, who sensed she was gaining an audience. "You know," she continued louder. "Now, my husband's brother is a neurosurgeon at Mass General, Dr. Lawrence Kensington. Perhaps you know him. I don't believe our paths have crossed, Dr. Okafor," replied her voice still even. "I'm based at Johns Hopkins and primarily work in pediatrics." Victoria's smile turned brittle. "Oh, pediatrics. That explains it. Not quite the same pressure as adult surgery, is it? More like glorified pediatrician work." At this blatant insult to her specialty, Dr. Okafor finally set down her tablet and turned to face Victoria directly. Though her expression remained controlled, something in her eyes had changed, a hardening, a focus, like a surgeon identifying the precise area requiring intervention. "Mrs. Kensington," she began, her voice soft but carrying steel underneath pediatric neurosurgery, "requires operating on brain structures often smaller than a grain of rice frequently, while they're still developing. The margin for error is measured in micrometers, and the consequences of those errors affect entire lifetimes. Children aren't simply small adults. Their neuroplasticity presents unique challenges and opportunities that require specialized expertise." She paused, then added with perfect professional courtesy, "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to complete before landing in Geneva." A few seats away, Daniela Morales suppressed a smile of approval. Sophia, passing with a drink tray, slowed momentarily, her eyes widening at Dr. Okafor's composed but firm response. Victoria flushed clearly, not accustomed to being corrected, especially with such precision. "Well, I never." Michael appeared instantly at her side, a practiced smile on his face. "Mrs. Kensington, your caviar service is ready, and Chef Guillaume has prepared the truffle risotto exactly as you prefer it." This diversion temporarily redirected Victoria's attention, allowing Dr. Okafor to put on her noise-canceling headphones and return to her work. But the initial skirmish had set something in motion, a dynamic that would continue to escalate as the flight progressed. An elderly man across the aisle caught Dr. Okafor's eye and gave her a subtle nod of respect before returning to his book. A small gesture, but it indicated the cabin's sentiment was not universally aligned with Victoria's perspective. As passengers settled into their meal service, conversations resumed, but with a new undercurrent of awareness. Several people cast occasional glances toward seats 2A and 2B, sensing the tension brewing between the two women. Gabriel Martinez, observing from his position near the galley, made a mental note to keep an eye on the situation. In his 20 years as purser, he had developed an instinct for detecting potential problems, and something about Victoria's expression. The narrowed eyes, the tight smile, the calculating glance triggered his internal alarm system. For now, the confrontation had subsided. But like gathering storm clouds on the horizon, the conditions were forming for something far more severe. At 27, Dr. Amara Okafor had arrived early at the International Neurological Conference in Boston, eager to present her groundbreaking research on pediatric brainstem tumors. After months of preparation and reviewing each slide until she could recite the data from memory, she approached the presenter's preparation room in her carefully chosen conservative suit, credentials prominently displayed. The older white attendant stepped into her path, blocking the door. "Excuse me," he said with exaggerated patience. "The housekeeping staff uses the service entrance. This area is for presenters only." Amara touched her conference badge. "I am Dr. Okafor. I'm presenting in Hall C at 10:30. The attendant's face registered surprise, then embarrassment, though not quite remorse. "Oh. Well, the resemblance to the cleaning staff. You understand the confusion." That moment had crystallized something for Amara. The understanding that no matter her accomplishments, her first introduction would always be her skin. Not her research, not her surgical innovations, not the lives she had saved. That evening in her hotel room, she had called her mother, voice tight with controlled emotion. "They didn't even look at my badge, Mama. Just saw my face and decided where I belonged." Her mother had sighed, a sound heavy with generational understanding. "So what will you do now, my daughter?" "I'm going to become so exceptional, they can't look away." From that day forward, Amara carried her credentials everywhere, not just at conferences. The WHO badge, the Johns Hopkins ID, the International Medical Authority certification. These weren't symbols of status, but necessary armor against assumptions. She had learned that excellence wasn't enough. She needed documentary evidence of that excellence readily available. Victoria Kensington's history with service complaints stretched back over 2 decades and across multiple airlines, hotels, and restaurants. What few knew was that these complaints followed a specific pattern. They disproportionately targeted staff members of color, particularly those who didn't display the deference Victoria believed she deserved. 3 years ago, Victoria had filed a formal complaint against a black flight attendant named James Thompson, claiming he had been aggressive when asking her to stow her bag. The cabin recording had shown James using exactly the same wording and tone he used with every passenger, but Victoria's complaint had nonetheless triggered a disciplinary review. James had eventually been cleared, but the incident had delayed his promotion by 6 months. On some level, Victoria sensed she was becoming a caricature of entitlement, a person her younger self would have despised. Last week, while organizing her closet, she'd found a photo from her college days. Victoria at 20, passionate, idealistic volunteering at a community health clinic in a low-income neighborhood. When had that woman disappeared? Sometimes in quiet moments, usually late at night when insomnia struck, Victoria wondered if success had cost more than it was worth. But these flickers of self-awareness never lasted long. They were quickly submerged beneath practiced indignation and the constant need to reaffirm her position in a world where aging women became increasingly invisible, unless they fought for recognition through displays of power and status. In Seat 3B, Daniela Morales observed the interaction between Victoria and Dr. Okafor with the experienced eye of someone who had spent 15 years representing victims of discrimination. As a Harvard-educated attorney of Mexican heritage, she had her own collection of stories. The time a courthouse security guard had directed her to the defendant's table rather than the attorney's. The client who had asked to speak with a real lawyer. The partner who had complimented her for being surprisingly articulate. She recognized in Dr. Okafor's composed responses the same careful navigation she herself had mastered, the constant calculation of how to stand your ground without fulfilling stereotypes of the angry minority. Daniela discreetly made a note on her phone, an old habit from her days documenting patterns of behavior for court cases. Classic microaggression escalation pattern, she typed. White subject attempting to provoke emotional response to justify pre-existing bias. Michael Torres moved through the cabin with a smile that never reached his eyes. At 48, he had built his career on a simple principle: the customer was always right, especially when they were wrong. It wasn't about justice. It was about avoiding complaints. Each complaint meant a letter in his file, and 3 letters meant a performance review. He couldn't afford that, not with his son's college tuition payments and his mother's assisted living costs. So he had learned to see without seeing, to hear without hearing. When Victoria made her comment about standards, he had pretended not to understand the implication. When she questioned Dr. Okafor's profession, he had redirected rather than corrected. In his 20 years of flying, Michael had become an expert in the art of selective blindness. Sometimes at night in the anonymous hotel rooms between flights, he wondered about the cost of this carefully cultivated blindness. But in the light of day, survival always took precedence over moral accounting. Sofia Alvarez, watching Michael navigate Victoria's demands, felt a familiar knot in her stomach. 6 months ago, during her training, she had witnessed a senior flight attendant move a Middle Eastern family from first class to economy after a white passenger expressed security concerns. The family had complied without protest, their dignity intact but visibly wounded. Sophia had said nothing, then had followed the senior attendant's lead. The memory still burned. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Just because they pay for first class doesn't mean they own your self-respect. Sophia had grown up watching her mother clean hotel rooms, coming home with stories of how the wealthy behaved when they thought no one of consequence was watching. "Remember, Mijita," her mother would say, "how they treat people like me shows you who they really are." Now, as Sophia prepared the drink cart for the main cabin service, she found herself glancing repeatedly toward Dr. Okafor. There was something in the doctor's quiet dignity that reminded Sophia of her mother. That same core of strength beneath a carefully maintained exterior. Gabriel Martinez had seen this dynamic play out countless times over his career. His policy was simple: follow procedure document, everything intervene only when necessary. He had 5 years until retirement, a pension to protect, and no desire to become entangled in the politics of passenger conflicts. His job was to ensure safety and basic comfort, not to adjudicate social justice. Still, as he observed Victoria's increasingly pointed behavior and Dr. Okafor's contained responses, he felt the familiar warning signs of a situation that might require official intervention. He made a mental note to brief the captain during their next routine check-in, just in case. For her part, Dr. Okafor returned to her presentation, but her mind briefly wandered to the children who would benefit from her research. Children like 7-year-old Isabel, whose inoperable tumor had been deemed a death sentence until Amara had pioneered a new approach to reach it. Children whose lives hung in the balance while adults played power games over airplane seats and social hierarchies. That perspective, the knowledge that what truly mattered was far removed from this cramped metal tube and its artificial status symbols, allowed her to center herself once more. Victoria Kensington was not the first obstacle in her path, and she would likely not be the last. Like all the others, she would be navigated with precision and then left behind. 1 hour into the flight, the tension that had been simmering beneath the surface finally began to boil over. Dr. Okafor had returned to reviewing her presentation, whispering medical terminology under her breath as she fine-tuned the wording on a particularly complex slide explaining a new surgical approach. Middle cranial fossa approach via temporal, no subtemporal craniotomy for optic pathway tumors. Victoria, who had been watching Dr. Okafor with barely concealed irritation, abruptly pressed her call button. When the chime didn't immediately summon an attendant, she pressed it again, and again, and again. The repeated pinging drew attention from throughout the first-class cabin. Michael appeared quickly, his smile strained at the edges. "Mrs. Kensington? How can I help you?" "This woman is talking to herself," Victoria declared loudly, gesturing toward Dr. Okafor. "Mumbling nonsense about craniums or whatever. It's making me extremely uncomfortable." Dr. Okafor removed her headphones. "I'm preparing a medical presentation," she explained calmly. "I apologize if my voice carried." Victoria scoffed. "Medical presentation? You've been muttering gibberish for the past 20 minutes. I'm concerned about her mental state," she added, addressing Michael while pointing at Dr. Okafor as if she weren't present. "Is she on something? Should someone check her pupils?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. Several passengers turned to stare openly, now the pretense of disinterest abandoned. Jordan Reynolds continued filming discreetly, recognizing the escalation pattern from similar incidents he'd documented. Michael's eyes darted between the two women, calculation evident in his expression. Mrs. Kensington was a known quantity, a demanding but lucrative regular who had the ear of corporate. Dr. Okafor was an unknown variable despite her impressive title. "I'm sure Dr. Okafor is just preparing for her work in Geneva," he said diplomatically. "But perhaps, Doctor, you could use headphones if you need to practice aloud?" I wasn't aware my voice was audible. Dr. Okafor replied evenly. "But yes, I can certainly continue in silence." Victoria wasn't satisfied with this resolution. "She's making me very nervous. I don't feel safe sitting next to someone behaving so erratically." An elderly man across the aisle let out a loud, derisive snort. "Erratically." The lady's been quieter than a church mouse while you've been causing a scene since takeoff." Victoria shot him a venomous look. "I wasn't speaking to you." "No, you were trying to get someone removed from their seat based on nothing," he replied mildly before returning to his book. This unexpected intervention from another passenger momentarily derailed Victoria's strategy. She hadn't anticipated public pushback against her complaints. Dr. Okafor's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. A momentary break in her composure that revealed just how deeply the accusation cut. She had spent her entire career being held to impossible standards, always needing to be twice as composed, twice as professional, twice as qualified, just to be considered equal. "My behavior has been anything but erratic, Mrs. Kensington," she stated, her patience wearing thin, but her voice still controlled. "I am working. I suggest you do the same, or perhaps enjoy the excellent wine selection this airline offers." "How dare you?" Victoria gasped, genuinely offended. She was accustomed to people cowering before her displeasure, not calmly standing their ground. "You're being aggressive now. I feel threatened." The word threatened acted like a trigger phrase. Michael's posture immediately stiffened, his training kicking in. Any claim of feeling threatened required formal response according to airline protocol. "Mrs. Kensington, could you explain what's making you feel threatened?" he asked, his tone now more official. "Her tone, her attitude," Victoria said, warming to her performance. "She keeps staring at me, making these strange comments. I paid for a comfortable, safe flight, not to be harassed by someone clearly not in their right mind." From across the aisle, a young woman in seat 3C couldn't contain herself any longer. "Oh, come on," she said, rolling her eyes. "The doctor has barely looked at you while you've been glaring at her since boarding. This is getting ridiculous." "Stay out of this," Victoria snapped. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually," said Daniela Morales, her attorney's voice carrying quiet authority, creating a disturbance that disrupts other passengers' flight experience concerns all of us. Victoria's face flushed with anger at this growing resistance. She had expected the usual pattern of accommodation, not collective pushback. Her eyes narrowed as she sought leverage. "I don't know what kind of operation this airline is running," she hissed at Michael. "But I've been a loyal Platinum member for 15 years, and I expect to be treated accordingly." Dr. Okafor took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before responding. She had navigated countless microaggressions throughout her career, but rarely had she encountered such blatant prejudice wrapped in the language of personal safety. "Mr. Torres," she said, addressing Michael directly, "I have been reviewing medical terminology for a presentation I'm delivering at the International Health Summit tomorrow. I have not stared at, spoken to, or in any way engaged with Mrs. Kensington except to respond to her accusations. If my presence is somehow threatening to her, perhaps that merits some reflection." Sophia had appeared at the edge of the scene, ostensibly to collect empty glasses, but clearly monitoring the situation. Her eyes met Dr. Okafor's briefly, a flash of understanding passing between them. Michael found himself in the uncomfortable position of referee in a conflict where the power dynamics were complex. Mrs. Kensington represented the type of customer the airline explicitly instructed him to prioritize. Yet Dr. Okafor was clearly being reasonable, and the implications of Victoria's complaints were becoming increasingly troubling. Perhaps Michael suggested tentatively we could see if there's another available seat in first class. Would that help resolve the situation? Victoria smiled triumphantly, assuming the offer was directed at her seatmate. "Yes, I think that would be best. For everyone's comfort and safety." Michael hesitated, then clarified. "Dr. Okafor, would you be willing to move to another seat? I believe 4C might be available." The request hung in the air for a moment. Dr. Okafor looked at Michael, then at Victoria, then at the other passengers watching the scene unfold. She understood exactly what was happening. She was being asked to move not because she had done anything wrong, but because her very presence had triggered someone else's prejudice, and the airline was choosing to accommodate that prejudice rather than confront it. "No," Dr. Okafor said simply. "I will not be moving. My seat is confirmed, my behavior has been appropriate, and I have work to complete." The clarity and firmness of her refusal seemed to catch Michael off guard. He was accustomed to passengers accepting the path of least resistance, especially when offered with a veneer of courtesy. "I see," he said, unsure how to proceed. "Then perhaps—" "This is unacceptable," Victoria interrupted, her voice rising. "If she won't move, then you need to move me. I refuse to sit next to someone who makes me feel unsafe." From several rows back, a man in an expensive suit spoke up. "I'll trade seats with you, ma'am. I'm in 5A. Victoria turned momentarily hopeful, then frowned when she saw the speaker was a well-dressed black man. That's not. I meant a more appropriate seat." A ripple of discomfort passed through the cabin at this revealing response. Several passengers exchanged glances, the subtext of Victoria's preference now unmistakable. "Let me check what's available," Michael replied, relieved to have a potential solution. He stepped away to consult the passenger manifest on his tablet. Gabriel Martinez approached quietly. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his experienced eyes taking in the tableau before him. "This woman refuses to stop her disruptive behavior," Victoria declared before anyone else could speak. "I've asked repeatedly for some peace and quiet, and now she's being hostile." "I see," Gabriel said neutrally. "And the behavior in question is—" "Muttering, staring, being generally unsettling," Victoria replied, gaining confidence from the presence of another authority figure. "I paid for first class. I expect a certain standard of experience." Gabriel turned to Dr. Okafor. "Ma'am, your perspective." "It's Dr. Okafor corrected calmly. "I'm a neurosurgeon preparing for a keynote address. I was reviewing my notes quietly. Mrs. Kensington has objected to my presence since boarding, though I've given her no cause." Several passengers nodded in agreement with Dr. Okafor's assessment, including the elderly couple in row 4 and Daniela Morales in 3B. Gabriel nodded, his expression revealing nothing. "I understand. Mr. Torres is checking seating options. Let's see what alternatives might be available." As Gabriel stepped away to confer with Michael, Victoria leaned toward Dr. Okafor, her voice low but intense. "People like you are always pushing your way into spaces where you don't belong," she hissed, "playing the victim when you're called out." Dr. Okafor did not respond verbally, but her gaze held steady, refusing to be diminished. The exchange lasted only seconds, but spoke volumes about the real issue underlying the conflict. Around them, the first-class cabin had become uncomfortably quiet, the usual ambient noise of conversation replaced by strained silence. Everyone was watching now, some openly, some pretending absorption in screens or magazines while stealing glances. The stage was set for the confrontation to escalate further. All that remained was to see who would make the next move and how far they would push the boundaries of civility that barely contained the raw emotions now circulating through the pressurized cabin. As Michael and Gabriel conferred near the galley, the situation in row 2 deteriorated rapidly. Victoria's frustration at the lack of immediate resolution manifested in increasingly physical ways. She adjusted her seat position repeatedly, each movement deliberately encroaching on the invisible boundary between her space and Dr. Okafor's. "I need more room," Victoria announced to no one in particular, extending her elbow onto the shared armrest with exaggerated necessity. Dr. Okafor, who had returned to her work, shifted slightly to maintain a small buffer zone between them. She didn't comment, didn't complain, simply adapted to the shrinking territory while continuing to review her presentation. Victoria's next move was more direct. As she reached for her water glass, her arm accidentally swept across the shared console, knocking Dr. Okafor's presentation notes to the floor. Papers scattered across the premium carpet, some sliding under the seat in front. "Oh dear," Victoria said with transparent insincerity. How clumsy of me, Doctor. Okafor paused, took a measured breath, then carefully unbuckled her seatbelt to retrieve her documents. As she leaned down, Victoria took the opportunity to place her designer handbag on Dr. Okafor's seat. When Dr. Okafor straightened papers, now somewhat disorganized, in her hands, she found half her seat occupied by Victoria's belongings. "Excuse me," Dr. Okafor said, her voice still remarkably controlled. "You've placed your bag on my seat. I needed somewhere to put it while I get something from the overhead," Victoria replied, making no move toward the overhead bin or to reclaim her bag. "Please remove it," Dr. Okafor requested, standing beside the seat, her document pages clutched carefully. "I'll move it when I'm ready," Victoria replied, the challenge in her voice unmistakable. The elderly man across the aisle shook his head in disgust. "Good Lord, woman, what is wrong with you? Just move your bag." Victoria turned to glare at him. "I don't remember asking for your opinion, and I don't remember when basic courtesy became optional," he retorted. Sophia, who had been watching the exchange while pretending to organize the beverage cart, stepped forward. "Mrs. Kensington, let me help you with your bag. We need to keep the seats clear for safety reasons." Before Victoria could object, Sophia had smoothly lifted the bag and held it out to her with professional courtesy. "Would you like me to place this in the overhead compartment for you?" Victoria's lips tightened into a thin line. "Fine. But be careful with it. It's worth more than you make in a month." Sophia's smile remained fixed as she carefully stowed the bag. "Of course, Mrs. Kensington. Is there anything else you need?" "Yes." A different seat neighbor, Victoria muttered, but not quietly enough. From several rows back, someone let out a short, derisive laugh. The cabin's atmosphere had shifted subtly. What had begun as uncomfortable observation was evolving into collective disapproval of Victoria's behavior. Dr. Okafor reclaimed her seat and attempted to reorganize her scattered papers. Several pages had coffee stains on them from landing on the floor, and the careful sequence she had established was now disrupted. Still, her expression betrayed no frustration as she methodically reordered her materials. Jordan Reynolds, the documentary filmmaker, continued recording discreetly. "Textbook escalation pattern," he whispered to his seatmate. "When verbal intimidation fails, move to physical space violation." Victoria's next tactical move came when Dr. Okafor tried to recline her seat slightly to review the papers more comfortably. "Don't even think about reclining," Victoria snapped. "It cuts into my space completely. The seats are designed to recline without significantly impacting the passenger behind." Dr. Okafor pointed out, her finger still on the recline button. "I said no," Victoria insisted. "It's invasive and inconsiderate, Doctor." Okafor considered her options, then removed her finger from the button, choosing yet again to adapt rather than escalate. She adjusted her reading glasses instead and continued working from the upright position. Daniela Morales had abandoned all pretense of not watching. Her legal mind was cataloging each escalation, each boundary crossed. As a civil rights attorney, she had seen this pattern before. The incremental testing of limits, the deliberate provocations designed to elicit a reaction that could then be labeled as aggression. Thomas Walker, meanwhile, had shifted from passive observer to active supporter of Victoria's position. "Some people just don't understand the etiquette of premium travel," he remarked loudly enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "Standards really have declined." The comment earned him an appreciative glance from Victoria, who clearly valued the reinforcement of her perspective. The dynamic was shifting from a one-on-one conflict to something more complex, a coalition forming against Dr. Okafor, who remained isolated in her dignity. Victoria, emboldened by Thomas's support and the flight crew's apparent reluctance to directly address her behavior, made her most aggressive move yet. She reached across the shared space and picked up Dr. Okafor's tablet. "What is this you're so engrossed in, anyway? Let's see what's so important that you need to disturb an entire cabin." Dr. Okafor's hand shot out with surgical precision, catching Victoria's wrist before she could fully lift the tablet. Their eyes met in a moment of direct confrontation. "Remove your hand from my property immediately," Dr. Okafor said, her voice quiet, but with an unmistakable edge of authority that had been absent until now. Victoria froze, genuinely startled by the swift reaction and the steel suddenly evident in Dr. Okafor's tone. For a brief moment, the power dynamic shifted perceptibly. "Let go of me," Victoria demanded, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. "You're hurting me. I am applying precisely enough pressure to prevent you from taking my property." "Nothing more," Dr. Okafor stated factually. "Once you release my tablet, I will release your wrist." A tense second passed. Victoria opened her fingers and the tablet settled back onto the console. True to her word, Dr. Okafor immediately released Victoria's wrist. "She attacked me," Victoria announced loudly, rubbing her wrist dramatically, though no mark or injury was visible. "Did everyone see that? She physically assaulted me." The accusation rang through the cabin, drawing immediate attention from all directions. Michael and Gabriel both hurried toward the scene, their faces set in professionally concerned expressions. "She's lying," came a clear voice from across the aisle. Daniela Morales had stood up. "I saw exactly what happened." Mrs. Kensington attempted to take Dr. Okafor's property without permission, and the doctor prevented her. "There was no attack." "Stay out of this," Victoria snapped. "This doesn't concern you." "Actually," Jordan interjected, holding up his phone, "I have the whole thing on video." The doctor was defending her property, nothing more. Victoria's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. She had not anticipated witnesses willing to contradict her version of events. She turned to Michael, whom she still viewed as her most likely ally. "I want her removed from this flight immediately," she demanded. "She's dangerous." Gabriel stepped forward, taking control of the situation from Michael. "Mrs. Kensington, Dr. Okafor, I need both of you to calm down. We cannot have physical confrontations on this aircraft regardless of the circumstances." "There was no confrontation until she put her hands on me," Victoria insisted. "That's not what happened," Dr. Okafor stated firmly. "Mrs. Kensington has been deliberately provocative since boarding. She has invaded my space, knocked my materials to the floor, prevented me from using the seat functions I paid for, and now attempted to take my personal property. I have been patient, but I will not allow theft of my devices containing confidential medical information." The clarity and precision of Dr. Okafor's statement hung in the air, impossible to dismiss. Gabriel, a veteran of passenger conflicts, recognized the ring of truth in her account. "I understand," he said carefully. "Mr. Torres, please check if we have any available seats where we might reaccommodate one of these passengers." "Of course," Michael replied, relieved to have a concrete task that might resolve the situation. As Michael stepped away, Victoria leaned toward Dr. Okafor once more. "This isn't over," she whispered, her voice like ice. "People like you need to learn your place." Dr. Okafor met her gaze steadily. "My place is exactly where I am, Mrs. Kensington, in seat 2B, which I paid for, doing work that saves children's lives. Perhaps you should reflect on what your place truly is." The quiet dignity of this response seemed to inflame Victoria further. Her hand inched toward the call button once more, her expression hardening with resolve. The physical confrontation had escalated the situation beyond simple annoyance to something far more volatile, and the next phase would prove decisive for everyone involved. "She threatened me." Victoria Kensington's voice carried throughout the first-class cabin, pitched at precisely the right frequency to convey alarm. "I heard her say she's going to make sure I get what's coming to me." Dr. Okafor looked up from her tablet, genuine confusion crossing her features. "That's completely untrue. I said nothing of the sort." By now, the repeated disturbances had drawn the attention of everyone in first class. Even passengers in the front row of business class were craning their necks to observe the developing situation. Victoria, sensing the audience, amplified her performance. First, she puts her hands on me, and now this, she continued, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. I don't feel safe. I want to speak to the captain immediately. Michael hurried over his expression, strained. Mrs. Kensington, the captain is currently piloting the aircraft and cannot leave the cockpit for passenger disputes. But I assure you we're taking this very seriously. Taking it seriously would mean removing this woman from my vicinity, Victoria retorted. She doesn't belong in first class anyway. Her ticket must be fake or upgraded with points or something. This direct attack on Dr. Okafor's legitimacy as a first-class passenger crossed a line that even Michael couldn't ignore. His eyes flickered with momentary discomfort. All of our passengers have valid tickets, Mrs. Kensington, he said carefully. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Fine. Then check her ID. I bet it doesn't even match her ticket. Gabriel Martinez, who had been conferring with Sophia near the galley, approached at this escalation. Is there a problem here? He asked, though the answer was obvious. This passenger is demanding we verify Dr. Okafor's identification. Michael explained, clearly uncomfortable with the request. Gabriel turned to Dr. Okafor. I apologize for the inconvenience, Doctor, but in the interest of resolving this situation, would you mind showing your ID? The request hung in the air, its implications unmistakable. No other passenger was being asked to prove their identity or right to occupy their seat. Only the black woman faced this scrutiny. Dr. Okafor's expression remained composed, but something shifted in her posture, a subtle straightening of her spine, a squaring of her shoulders. She had faced this moment countless times before in hospitals, at conferences, in restaurants and hotels. The moment when her very presence required justification. I presented my identification at check-in and again at boarding, she stated evenly. No other passenger is being asked to re-verify their identity mid-flight. I decline. Victoria seized on this refusal. See, she can't show ID because she doesn't have proper documentation. She probably snuck into first class when no one was looking, from row 3. Daniela Morales spoke up again. Requiring only certain passengers to produce identification during a flight based on complaints from another passenger may constitute discriminatory treatment under federal aviation regulations. Victoria whipped around. Nobody asked for your legal opinion? Mind your own business. Actually, Daniela replied calmly as a civil rights attorney, this is precisely my business. The elderly gentleman across the aisle chuckled. She's got you there, hasn't she? Victoria's face flushed deeper. Why is everyone defending her? Can't you see what's happening here? We can all see exactly what's happening, the elderly man replied, removing his glasses to clean them deliberately. That's why we're speaking up. His wife nodded in agreement. In our day, we stayed quiet too often when we should have said something. Not anymore. Gabriel recognized the situation was spiraling toward a public relations disaster. A confrontation involving accusations of discrimination witnessed by multiple first-class passengers with influence and recording devices represented exactly the sort of incident airlines dreaded in the social media era. Mrs. Kensington, he said diplomatically, I understand your concerns, but I can assure you that all passengers in this cabin have been properly ticketed and screened. Now, Mr. Torres has been checking if we have any seating alternatives. I'm not the one who should move. Victoria interrupted. She's the problem here. She's been aggressive, threatening, and disruptive from the moment we took off. Sophia, who had been silent throughout most of the exchange, finally spoke. I've been serving this cabin since departure, and I haven't observed Dr. Okafor being disruptive in any way. Michael shot Sophia a warning glance, but she continued. In fact, Dr. Okafor has been working quietly while responding to repeated provocations with remarkable patience. Victoria's eyes narrowed at this unexpected resistance. You're obviously biased, she snapped at Sophia. I want to speak with someone who will take my concerns seriously. Thomas Walker chose this moment to add his voice from across the aisle. I've been observing the situation, and I have to agree with Mrs. Kensington. The other passenger has been muttering constantly and creating an uncomfortable atmosphere. Jordan Reynolds couldn't contain himself any longer. Are you serious? She's been quietly working on medical documents while being repeatedly harassed. I've recorded the whole interaction. Victoria glared at Jordan. It's illegal to film me without consent. Actually, Daniela interjected, in a public space like an airline cabin, there's no expectation of privacy, particularly when the recording documents potential civil rights violations. I am not violating anyone's civil rights, Victoria exploded. I just don't want to sit next to someone who's clearly not supposed to be here. The words hung in the air, their implication unmistakable. Even Thomas Walker, who had supported Victoria earlier, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Gabriel raised his hands in a calming gesture. Please, everyone. This is an aircraft, not a courtroom. Our primary concern is the safety and comfort of all passengers. Exactly. Victoria seized on his words. And I don't feel safe or comfortable with this woman sitting next to me. She grabbed me, threatened me, and has been behaving erratically. As a premium passenger who flies this route monthly, I expect you to take my concerns seriously. Gabriel turned to Michael. What options do we have for reseating? Michael consulted his tablet. First class is fully booked. We could move someone to business, but it would mean a downgrade. Victoria smiled triumphantly, assuming Dr. Okafor would be the one downgraded. Well, that seems like the obvious solution. Gabriel hesitated, clearly torn between company policy that prioritized high-status frequent flyers and the growing evidence that Victoria's complaints were unfounded and potentially discriminatory. In the silence that followed, Dr. Okafor finally spoke. I paid for this seat. I have conducted myself appropriately. I will not be moved to accommodate prejudice disguised as discomfort. Her words, though quietly spoken, carried a weight that seemed to settle over the entire cabin. Even Victoria appeared momentarily taken aback by their clarity and conviction. Michael and Gabriel exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Then Gabriel made a decision that would alter the course of events dramatically. Dr. Okafor, would you mind if we speak privately for a moment? He requested, gesturing toward the galley area. Dr. Okafor considered the request, then nodded once. She gathered her tablet and followed Gabriel to the front of the cabin, conscious of the eyes tracking her movement. As they reached the relative privacy of the galley, Gabriel lowered his voice. Doctor, I want to apologize for this situation. However, I need to ask if you would consider moving to business class with appropriate compensation, of course. It might be the simplest way to resolve this conflict. Dr. Okafor looked at him steadily. You're asking me to move because another passenger doesn't want to sit next to a black woman in first class. Gabriel flinched slightly at the directness of her assessment. That's not. We're just trying to find a peaceful resolution. By accommodating discriminatory behavior, Dr. Okafor stated. It wasn't a question. We have a responsibility to all our passengers, Gabriel began. Including me, Dr. Okafor interjected. I paid the same premium fare. I have behaved appropriately. Yet I'm the one being asked to relocate. Gabriel had no ready response to this simple truth. I will not move, Dr. Okafor continued. And if you attempt to force me to do so without cause, I will ensure this incident receives the full attention it deserves from the appropriate authorities. While this conversation occurred out of earshot, Victoria had not remained idle. She had pressed her call button again and was now loudly proclaiming to Michael that she felt physically threatened and was considering calling her attorney from the plane's satellite phone. She's clearly unstable, Victoria insisted. I've never been treated this way on any flight, and I fly over 100,000 miles annually. This is completely unacceptable. Michael, increasingly trapped between company policy and moral clarity, attempted to placate her. Mrs. Kensington, we're exploring all options to resolve this situation. The purser is speaking with Dr. Okafor now. Well, tell him to hurry up, Victoria demanded. I can't be expected to sit next to someone like that for 7 more hours. The phrase, someone like that, hung in the air, its implication unmistakable to everyone within earshot. As Gabriel and Dr. Okafor returned to the main cabin, Victoria straightened in her seat, expecting victory. Instead, Gabriel's expression was grave and professional. Mrs. Kensington, Dr. Okafor, after reviewing the situation, we've determined that no seat reassignment will be made at this time. Both of you have valid tickets for your assigned seats. We ask that you respect each other's space for the remainder of the flight. Victoria's face flushed with anger and disbelief. This is outrageous. I've been a loyal customer for years, and this is how you treat me, by siding with her. We're not taking sides, Mrs. Kensington, Gabriel replied evenly. We're simply maintaining the seating assignments as purchased. Victoria turned to Michael, whom she still viewed as an ally. Michael, surely you're not going to let this stand after everything I've experienced on this flight? Michael hesitated, visibly torn between his instinct to appease a valued customer and his growing awareness of the ethical dimensions of the situation. Mrs. Kensington, he began carefully, perhaps we could offer you some complimentary services to make the remainder of your flight more comfortable. An extra amenity kit perhaps, or a special meal from the chef. This attempt at distraction only inflamed Victoria further. I don't want freebies. I want her moved. She pointed directly at Dr. Okafor, her finger trembling with rage. She doesn't look like she belongs here. I want her moved now. The cabin fell completely silent at this explicit statement of prejudice. Even Thomas Walker, who had supported Victoria earlier, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. In this charged moment of silence, Dr. Okafor reached slowly into her briefcase. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, as she extracted a small leather folio and opened it. Since my word is insufficient, she said quietly, perhaps this will clarify matters. She held up an identification badge bearing the seal of the World Health Organization. Below her photograph, the words, Dr. Amara Okafor, M.D., Ph.D., Medical Director, Global Pediatric Surgical Initiative, were clearly visible. Beside it was a second credential from Johns Hopkins Hospital, identifying her as Chief of Pediatric Neurosurgery. I have performed over 3,000 brain surgeries on children. Dr. Okafor continued, her voice calm, but carrying throughout the now silent cabin. Tomorrow I will deliver the keynote address at the International Health Summit, where I will announce a breakthrough surgical technique that reduces mortality in pediatric brainstem tumors by 42%. My research has been funded by the Lasker Foundation and has saved hundreds of children's lives. She turned her gaze directly to Victoria. So yes, Mrs. Kensington, I do belong here. The question now is whether you do. The revelation of Dr. Okafor's credentials created a seismic shift in the cabin's atmosphere. Michael's face drained of color as recognition dawned, not just of who Dr. Okafor was professionally, but of the magnitude of the misjudgment he had made in handling the situation. Gabriel's expression remained carefully neutral, but a muscle twitched in his jaw as he processed the implications. Victoria Kensington, however, was not prepared to concede. Her worldview, constructed over decades of privilege and reinforced by countless accommodations to her demands, couldn't easily absorb this reversal. Credentials can be faked, she said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. Anyone can get a badge made. That proves nothing. From across the aisle, Thomas Walker, who had been Victoria's ally throughout, finally broke ranks. Victoria, for God's sake, stop. You've gone too far. Don't you turn on me too, Thomas, Victoria hissed. I'm the victim here. A ripple of disbelieving laughter passed through the cabin. The elderly gentleman who had spoken up earlier removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose in exasperation. The victim. Good heavens, woman. Are you completely detached from reality? Daniela Morales stood up, her legal mind having reached a decision. I feel compelled to inform everyone that I've been documenting this interaction. As a civil rights attorney with 15 years of experience, I recognize a textbook case of discrimination when I see one. Stay out of this, Victoria snapped, but her voice had lost its edge of authority. I will not, Daniela replied calmly. What I'm witnessing is actionable harassment based on race, which violates federal aviation statutes and potentially constitutes a civil rights violation. Jordan Reynolds, the documentary filmmaker, had also risen to his feet. I have the entire interaction recorded from Mrs. Kensington's first comments about standards declining to her demand that Dr. Okafor be removed because she doesn't look like she belongs here. Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass, knocking it over in the process. Water spilled across the console, some of it splashing onto Dr. Okafor's papers. The doctor calmly moved her materials away from the spreading puddle, while Sophia rushed forward with napkins. She made me nervous, Victoria stammered, grasping for any excuse. A young woman in row 5 snickered audibly. Right. She made you nervous by sitting quietly and being incredibly accomplished. How terrifying. The public nature of the confrontation had now expanded beyond the immediate participants to include a significant portion of the cabin's occupants. What had begun as one passenger's prejudice had evolved into a moment of collective reckoning. Victoria, sensing the tide turning against her but unwilling to surrender, made her final escalation. She pulled out her phone and began dialing. I'm calling my husband right now, she announced loudly. He's on the board of Global Atlantic's parent company. When he hears about this treatment, heads will roll. Starting with yours, she added, glaring at Gabriel. Sophia, who had been cleaning up the spilled water, straightened. Mrs. Kensington, I need to remind you that phone calls are not permitted during flight. Please turn off your device immediately. Don't you dare tell me what to do, Victoria snarled. You're just a flight attendant. You're all replaceable. The naked contempt in her voice hung in the air, revealing the true foundation of her behavior. Not fear or discomfort, but a fundamental belief in her own superiority and the inherent inferiority of those she considered beneath her. In row 4, the elderly woman who had been watching intently suddenly let out a delighted laugh. Oh, this brings back memories. In 1968, I was thrown off a bus in Alabama for sitting in the wrong seat. Some people still haven't learned, have they? Arthur, she said to her husband. Not much changes except the altitude, Margaret, he replied with a sad smile. Dr. Okafor, who had remained composed throughout, finally set down her credentials and turned fully toward Victoria. For the first time, she addressed her directly and at length, Mrs. Beth Kensington. She began, her voice neither raised nor angry, but carrying a gravity that commanded attention. I have watched you escalate this situation repeatedly despite my attempts to focus on my work and ignore your provocations. I have been patient with your comments, your physical intrusions, and your attempts to have me removed from a seat I paid for. She paused, meeting Victoria's gaze steadily. Your behavior reveals far more about you than it does about me. Every accusation you've made, that I'm erratic, aggressive, threatening, has actually described your own conduct. This pattern is familiar to anyone who has experienced discrimination. The perpetrator projects their own negative actions onto the victim, then claims to be threatened when those projections are rejected. The cabin had fallen completely silent. Even the ambient noise of the aircraft seemed to have faded as everyone listened to Dr. Okafor's measured words. I did not come on this flight looking for confrontation. I came to review a presentation that will help save children's lives. But now that you have forced this issue, I will not shy away from naming what is happening. This is racism, Mrs. Kensington. Plain and simple. Your discomfort is not with my behavior, but with my existence in a space you believe should be reserved for people who look like you. Victoria's mouth opened and closed, but for once no words emerged. The directness of Dr. Okafor's assessment had momentarily stunned her into silence. Michael, watching this exchange with growing alarm, tried once more to diffuse the situation. "Perhaps we should all take a moment to calm down." "No," Dr. Okafor interrupted, her voice still level but firm. "This situation does not call for calming down. It calls for clarity. For too long, incidents like this have been smoothed over in the name of comfort, specifically the comfort of those perpetrating harm. That ends now." She turned her attention to Michael and Gabriel. "You both had multiple opportunities to address this situation appropriately. Instead, you prioritized the comfort of someone exhibiting blatantly discriminatory behavior over the dignity of the person being discriminated against. That is not neutrality. It is complicity." Gabriel, to his credit, didn't attempt to defend himself. "You're right," he acknowledged quietly. "We should have handled this differently." Victoria, recovering from her momentary speechlessness, saw this admission as betrayal. "I cannot believe what I'm hearing. I've been loyal to this airline for decades. I spend thousands of dollars on first-class tickets every month. And this is how you repay that loyalty, by siding with her over me." "This isn't about sides, Mrs. Kensington," Gabriel replied. "It's about right and wrong. And in this case, we were wrong in how we responded to your complaints." Victoria's face flushed with rage. She stood abruptly, her movement so sudden that several nearby passengers flinched. "You," she said, pointing at Dr. Okafor, "have no idea who you're dealing with. And you," she turned to Gabriel, "can expect to be looking for a new job by the time this plane lands. I'm going to make sure every executive at Global Atlantic knows exactly how you've treated a premium customer today." She began gathering her belongings, stuffing them haphazardly into her designer handbag. "I refuse to sit here for another minute. Find me another seat immediately, or I swear I will make it my mission to destroy your careers." The threat hung in the air, its desperation palpable. Victoria had reached the limit of her strategies. Her complaints had been questioned. Her accusations refuted, her status challenged. All that remained was raw intimidation. Sophia caught Gabriel's eye, a silent question passing between them. He gave a subtle nod, and Sophia slipped away toward the interphone to the cockpit. "Mrs. Kensington," Gabriel said formally, "I need to ask you to return to your seat and lower your voice." "Absolutely not," Victoria replied. "I demand to be moved immediately. If you continue to refuse to comply with crew member instructions—" Gabriel continued, his voice taking on an official tone. "We will have no choice but to consider this a Level 2 interference with flight operations." The specific terminology, Level 2 interference, caught Victoria off guard. It was airline code for a passenger violation serious enough to warrant intervention measures. "Are you threatening me?" she asked incredulously. "I am informing you of airline policy," Gabriel replied. "Refusing to comply with crew member instructions, making threats against staff, and creating a disturbance that impacts the safety and comfort of other passengers are all violations of federal aviation regulations." Victoria looked around the cabin, seeking allies but finding none. Even Thomas Walker was now studiously avoiding her gaze. "This is your final opportunity to return to your seat calmly," Gabriel stated. "Otherwise, we will be forced to take further action." For a moment it seemed Victoria might comply. Her expression fluctuated between rage and calculation as she weighed her options. Then, in a final act of defiance, she knocked her champagne glass to the floor where it shattered against the premium carpet. "I will not be treated this way," she declared. "I want the captain. Now!" The glass breaking created a bright, sharp sound that seemed to crystallize the moment. Several passengers gasped. A flight attendant hurried forward with a small broom and dustpan. Gabriel nodded once as if a decision had been confirmed. "Mr. Torres, please inform the cockpit we need security protocol Alpha." Michael's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded and moved quickly toward the interphone. "What's security protocol Alpha?" Victoria demanded, her voice rising with the first notes of fear. "It's a request for air marshal intervention," Gabriel explained calmly. "When a passenger becomes disruptive to the point of potentially compromising cabin safety, we are required to involve law enforcement personnel." Air Marshal Victoria repeated, her face paling. "That's absurd. I'm not a security threat. You've refused multiple direct instructions from crew members, made threats against airline staff, created a disturbance and destroyed airline property," Gabriel replied, gesturing toward the broken glass. "Those actions fall under the definition of passenger misconduct, requiring intervention." The cabin had fallen into a stunned silence. The confrontation had escalated beyond anything the passengers had anticipated when Victoria first began complaining about her seat neighbor. Dr. Okafor remained seated, her expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. She understood that what was unfolding wasn't just about one prejudiced passenger, but about a moment when institutional responses to discrimination were being publicly tested. From the front of the cabin, a man in business casual attire approached. He hadn't been introduced to the passengers, but his presence had been noted throughout the flight. The plainclothes air marshal assigned to Flight 237. "I'm Air Marshal Diaz," he said quietly to Gabriel. "What's the situation?" Gabriel briefed him concisely with Sophia adding details where relevant. Victoria watched this exchange with growing alarm, the reality of her position finally beginning to dawn on her. "This is ridiculous," she protested, but with less conviction now. "I'm the victim here. I was just trying to have a peaceful flight." Mrs. Kensington Air Marshal Diaz addressed her directly. "I've been observing this situation develop, and I need to ask you to return to your seat immediately." "You've been watching? Then you saw how she threatened me," Victoria insisted, pointing at Dr. Okafor, who remained calmly seated. "Ma'am, I've been in this cabin since boarding," Diaz replied evenly. "What I observed was you escalating a situation repeatedly, despite multiple opportunities to de-escalate. Now please return to your seat, or I will have to take more formal measures." The authority in his voice was unmistakable. Victoria, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, found herself in a situation where her status, wealth, and connections offered no advantage, where in fact they had become liabilities by fueling behavior that had crossed from merely unpleasant to potentially criminal. "I want to speak to my attorney," she demanded, but her voice had lost its edge. "You'll have that opportunity after we land," Diaz assured her. "For now, you need to comply with crew instructions." Victoria stood frozen for a moment, trapped between pride and self-preservation. Then, with a final glare at Dr. Okafor, she reluctantly returned to her seat. "This isn't over," she muttered as she sat down. Dr. Okafor, who had observed the entire exchange with composed attention, simply nodded once. "On that point, Mrs. Kensington, we are in complete agreement." The revelation of Dr. Okafor's credentials had fundamentally altered the power dynamics within the cabin, but its full impact was still unfolding. As Victoria Kensington sat rigidly in her seat under the watchful eye of Air Marshal Diaz, the other passengers struggled to process what they had just witnessed. Michael Torres, the senior flight attendant who had initially prioritized Victoria's complaints, now hovered uncertainly near the galley. The WHO badge and Johns Hopkins credentials had triggered a belated recognition, not just of Dr. Okafor's professional stature, but of his own failure to recognize the discrimination playing out before him. Gabriel Martinez approached Dr. Okafor, his posture reflecting a new deference. "Doctor, on behalf of Global Atlantic Airways, I want to offer our sincere apologies for how this situation was handled. Your treatment was unacceptable." Dr. Okafor regarded him thoughtfully. "Thank you for that acknowledgement, Mr. Martinez. However, an apology that comes only after learning of someone's credentials isn't truly addressing the underlying problem." Gabriel nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "You're absolutely right. The way we responded to Mrs. Kensington's complaints reflected a fundamental failure in our protocols. Every passenger deserves equal respect regardless of their title or position. While they spoke, Jordan Reynolds continued filming discreetly. As a documentary filmmaker focused on social power dynamics, he recognized the rare opportunity to capture not just an incident of discrimination, but the moment when institutional representatives acknowledged their complicity in it. "This is gold," he whispered to Daniela Morales. "The exact moment when power shifts and truth is acknowledged." Victoria, watching this exchange from her seat, seethed with barely controlled rage. The public validation of Dr. Okafor, from the very airline staff she had expected to support her, represented a humiliation she had never experienced before. Her phone remained in her hand, though now turned off at Air Marshal Diaz's insistence. Sofia Alvarez approached with a fresh glass of water for Dr. Okafor. "I'm sorry, I didn't speak up sooner," she said quietly, her eyes conveying sincerity beyond her words. "Thank you, Sofia," Dr. Okafor replied, noting the flight attendant's name tag. "Sometimes the most difficult barriers to change are the ones we work within." As these conversations unfolded, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Erickson speaking. I've been briefed about a situation in our first-class cabin. I want to assure everyone that the aircraft is secure and we are proceeding to our destination as planned. However, I must remind all passengers that interfering with crew member duties or creating disturbances that impact flight safety will not be tolerated. Thank you for your cooperation." The public acknowledgement from the cockpit added another layer of official validation to what had occurred. Several passengers nodded in approval while Victoria sank lower in her seat, the full weight of her public disgrace beginning to register. In this moment of relative calm, Dr. Okafor returned to her work, reopening her tablet with the same focused efficiency she had demonstrated before the interruptions began. This simple act, the quiet resumption of her professional duties despite the extraordinary circumstances, spoke volumes about her character and resilience. Nearby passengers watched with newfound respect. The badge had transformed their perception, but it was Dr. Okafor's dignity throughout the ordeal that truly commanded their admiration. The elderly couple in row 4 exchanged knowing glances. "Reminds me of when we marched with Dr. King and Selma," the woman whispered. "Same quiet strength in the face of ugliness." Her husband nodded. "The difference is back then they didn't back down so easily." Progress, I suppose, even if it's slower than it should be. Michael, still processing his role in the situation, finally approached Dr. Okafor's seat. "Doctor, he began, then faltered, struggling to find appropriate words. "Yes, Mr. Torres," Dr. Okafor prompted gently. "I failed in my duty today," he admitted. "I prioritized Mrs. Kensington's status over what was right. I should have recognized what was happening much earlier." "Recognition is the first step," Dr. Okafor replied. "The question now is what happens the next time a passenger makes similar complaints about someone who doesn't happen to have credentials from prestigious institutions." The question hung in the air between them, challenging not just Michael but the entire framework of how such incidents were handled. Michael had no immediate answer, but his expression suggested the question had landed exactly as intended, as a catalyst for deeper reflection. Meanwhile, Victoria had withdrawn into a brittle silence, her body language broadcasting fury and humiliation in equal measure. The badge moment had stripped away her assumed authority and exposed the hollowness of her claims. More significantly, it had revealed to everyone present, including herself, the true nature of her objections to Dr. Okafor. For a brief moment, as she stared at her own reflection in the darkened window, Victoria confronted an uncomfortable truth. She had become someone she herself would have despised in her younger years. The realization was so painful she immediately pushed it away, replacing it with righteous indignation. It wasn't her fault. It was the airline's failure to maintain proper standards. It was the other passengers' inability to understand her legitimate concerns. It was the world's increasing hostility to people like her who simply wanted things done properly. Daniela Morales, the civil rights attorney who had spoken up earlier, made notes on her tablet. As someone who had litigated multiple discrimination cases, she recognized the potential significance of this incident in establishing precedent for how airlines handled similar situations in the future. "I'm documenting everything," she whispered to Jordan. "This could be important for my ongoing case against another airline." Thomas Walker, who had initially supported Victoria, now made a show of engrossing himself in his laptop, clearly eager to distance himself from his earlier alignment with her position. His corporate instinct for self-preservation had kicked in, recognizing which way the wind was now blowing. As the initial shock of the confrontation began to settle, a new passenger dynamic emerged in the cabin. Conversations resumed, but now they centered around Dr. Okafor. Respectful inquiries about her work, expressions of admiration for her composure, offers to connect professionally in Geneva. "I read your paper on minimally invasive approaches to pediatric gliomas," said a distinguished-looking man who had moved into a nearby seat during the commotion. "Brilliant work. You've changed how we think about accessing those regions." "Thank you," Dr. Okafor replied, genuinely pleased to discuss her research rather than defend her presence. "Are you attending the summit as well?" "Yes, presenting in the oncology track. James Wilson from Mass General. I'm familiar with your work on immunotherapy responses. The longitudinal study design was exceptional." Victoria observed this exchange with mounting bitterness, each friendly interaction directed toward Dr. Gauchita. Okafor felt like a personal rebuke, a rejection not just of her behavior, but of the worldview that had informed it. Air Marshal Diaz remained stationed nearby his presence, ensuring that the situation wouldn't escalate again. He had positioned himself strategically, close enough to intervene if necessary, but not so close as to create unnecessary tension. Gabriel Martinez, meanwhile, had retreated to the galley where he made a series of urgent calls to Global Atlantic's corporate headquarters. The situation had evolved beyond a routine passenger dispute to something with potential legal and public relations implications. Company executives needed to be briefed immediately. "Yes, sir," he said quietly into the phone. "Dr. Amara Okafor." "Yes, the neurosurgeon." "No, I don't believe she's planning to file a complaint, but the incident was recorded by multiple passengers. Yes, Mrs. Kensington explicitly stated that Dr. Okafor didn't look like she belongs in first class." "I understand the sensitivity, sir. We're managing the situation as best we can." As these various responses unfolded around her, Dr. Okafor maintained her focus on her work, occasionally glancing out the window at the vast Atlantic below. From her perspective, what had transpired was unfortunately familiar. Unique in its specifics, but consistent with patterns she had navigated throughout her career. The badge hadn't changed who she was or what she deserved. It had simply made those truths visible to others who had been unwilling or unable to see them before. The fact that institutional recognition was required for her humanity to be fully acknowledged was itself a commentary on the very dynamics she had named during the confrontation. As she returned to reviewing her presentation, a breakthrough surgical technique that would save countless children's lives, Dr. Okafor allowed herself a moment of reflection. The incident had been draining, yes, but also clarifying. It had demonstrated once again the necessity of her work not just as a surgeon, but as someone willing to stand firm against the currents of bias that shaped so many interactions. The badge had created a moment of revelation for the cabin. But the true revelation wasn't about Dr. Okafor's credentials. It was about the conditional nature of dignity in spaces where power and prejudice intersected. That was a lesson everyone present would carry forward, whether they wished to or not. The first-class cabin of Flight 237 had transformed. What had once been a space of privilege and presumed exclusivity now felt like the aftermath of a significant social earthquake. Structures of deference and authority had been upended, assumptions challenged, and a new order established in their place. Gabriel Martinez returned from his communications with headquarters, his expression grave but resolved. He approached Dr. Okafor, first leaning in to speak quietly. Doctor, I've just spoken with our Chief Operating Officer. She has authorized me to inform you that Mrs. Kensington will be deplaned upon arrival and placed on our no-fly list, pending a full investigation of this incident. Dr. Okafor looked up from her tablet. That seems rather extreme. Is that standard protocol? No, Gabriel admitted, but the COO reviewed the initial report and felt that Mrs. Kensington's behavior constituted severe passenger misconduct, particularly her threats against crew members and her explicit discriminatory statements. Victoria, though not privy to this conversation, could observe the exchange taking place. Her face tightened with apprehension as she noted the serious expressions and lowered voices. Gabriel continued. The company would also like to extend our deepest apologies and offer you complimentary first-class travel on Global Atlantic for the next year. Dr. Okafor shook her head slightly. I appreciate the gesture, but that's unnecessary. What would be more meaningful is knowing what concrete steps the airline will take to prevent similar incidents in the future, particularly for passengers who don't happen to carry WHO credentials. Gabriel nodded, acknowledging the substance of her concern. The COO mentioned that as well. She's called an emergency meeting of the passenger experience team to review our protocols for handling discrimination complaints. She'd like to invite you to consult on those revisions if you're willing. I'll consider it, Dr. Okafor replied. My schedule is quite full with surgical commitments, but this is important work as well. As their conversation concluded, Gabriel moved across the aisle to where Victoria sat in rigid isolation. Air Marshal Diaz remained nearby, a silent reminder of the boundaries now firmly established. Mrs. Kensington Gabriel began formally. I need to inform you of several decisions that have been made regarding this incident. Victoria's expression hardened. I assume you're here to apologize for how I've been treated? No, ma'am. I'm here to inform you that upon landing in Geneva, you will be escorted from the aircraft by airport security and transferred to the custody of airline representatives. Your return flight has been canceled, and you've been placed on our restricted passenger list pending a full review of today's events. The color drained from Victoria's face. You can't be serious. Do you have any idea who I am? Who my husband is? Your identity and connections are not relevant to this decision, Mrs. Kensington Gabriel replied evenly. Your behavior violated multiple airline policies and potentially federal aviation regulations. The decision has been made at the corporate level and is not subject to negotiation. For perhaps the first time in the entire confrontation, Victoria Kensington appeared genuinely shocked. The mechanisms of privilege and influence that had served her throughout her adult life had suddenly failed, not just temporarily but comprehensively. This is outrageous, she sputtered, though her protest lacked the confident authority it had carried earlier. I'll sue the airline. I'll make sure everyone involved regrets this decision. That is your right, Gabriel acknowledged. In the meantime, I must ask you to remain in your seat for the duration of the flight, with minimal interaction with other passengers or crew members. As Gabriel stepped away, Sophia approached with a glass of water for Dr. Okafor. I brought this for you, doctor. And... She hesitated briefly, then continued with quiet sincerity. Thank you for standing your ground. It meant a lot to see someone refuse to be moved. Dr. Okafor accepted the water with a grateful nod. Thank you, Sophia. And thank you for speaking the truth when it mattered. That takes courage, especially in your position. Across the aisle, Jordan Reynolds was engaged in quiet conversation with Daniela Morales, the civil rights attorney. Their shared interest in documentation and accountability had created an impromptu alliance. I have about 30 minutes of footage, Jordan explained in hushed tones. Clear audio of the discriminatory comments, the threats, everything. Daniela nodded thoughtfully. That could be significant. There's been a pattern of airlines accommodating discriminatory demands rather than addressing them. Documentation like yours could help establish a different standard. Would you be interested in reviewing it for a documentary I'm developing on social power dynamics? Jordan asked. Your legal perspective would be invaluable." "I'd be happy to," Daniela replied, passing him her business card. This incident is unfortunately representative of much broader patterns. As the cabin settled into a new equilibrium, a flight attendant approached Dr. Wilson, who had been conversing with Dr. Okafor about their respective research. "Dr. Wilson, would you be willing to move to seat 2A for the remainder of the flight? Mrs. Kensington will be relocated to a jump seat in the galley area." "Absolutely," Dr. Wilson replied, gathering his materials. When informed of this decision, Victoria's face flushed with humiliation. "A jump seat. In the galley. Like a flight attendant. It's either that or remain beside Dr. Okafor," Gabriel explained calmly. "Given your expressed discomfort, we thought this would be preferable." Victoria had no choice but to comply, gathering her belongings with trembling hands. As she was escorted to the cramped jump seat normally reserved for crew members, several passengers watched with undisguised satisfaction. "Poetic justice," murmured the elderly gentleman to his wife. "From first class to not even coach." Dr. Wilson settled into the newly vacated 2A, nodding respectfully to Dr. Okafor. "I hope you don't mind a new neighbor for the remainder of the flight." "Not at all," she replied warmly. "I was hoping to discuss your findings on immunotherapy responsiveness in pediatric patients. Your paper suggested some fascinating correlations with neural plasticity." Their professional conversation resumed as if the preceding drama had never occurred. A return to normalcy that was perhaps the most powerful statement about belonging and legitimacy. Michael, observing the cabin's mood shift, felt a complex mixture of relief and discomfort. The immediate crisis had been resolved, but its resolution had exposed failures in his own judgment and conduct. He had prioritized Victoria's status and complaints despite growing evidence of their discriminatory nature. That realization would require personal reckoning beyond the professional consequences he might face. Sophia, meanwhile, moved through the cabin with renewed confidence. Her decision to speak truth despite hierarchy had been validated, not punished. That small victory, being recognized for integrity rather than compliance, shifted something fundamental in her understanding of her role. As the flight progressed toward its halfway point, a new atmosphere settled over the first-class cabin. It wasn't merely a return to the pre-conflict calm, but something more thoughtful and aware. The passengers had witnessed not just an interpersonal conflict, but a moment when the usual social scripts had been suspended, allowing underlying truths to emerge with unusual clarity. Dr. Okafor, having completed her review of the presentation materials, closed her tablet and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The incident had been draining in the way such confrontations always were, requiring careful calibration of response management of emotion and strategic deployment of credentials. But unlike many similar encounters throughout her career, this one had resulted in genuine accountability rather than grudging accommodation or hollow apologies. That difference mattered not just for her immediate comfort, but for the precedent it established. Someone else might benefit from the boundaries she had held firm today. Perhaps someone without WHO credentials or a position at Johns Hopkins, someone whose dignity would now be recognized as inherent rather than contingent on titles or affiliations. As the aircraft continued its journey across the Atlantic, the immediate aftermath settled into something approaching normalcy. But for everyone involved, the ripple effects of what had transpired would continue long after the seatbelt signs were turned off and the cabin doors opened in Geneva. While Flight 237 was still hours from Geneva, the digital shadow of what had occurred on board was already racing across the internet at the speed of outrage. Jordan Reynolds, the documentary filmmaker, had managed to upload several short clips during a brief connection to the aircraft's satellite Wi-Fi system. His careful edits captured the essence of the confrontation without revealing the identities of most passengers, with two notable exceptions. The first clip, titled "Racism at 30,000 Feet," showed Victoria Kensington demanding that Dr. Okafor be moved because she doesn't look like she belongs here. The second, when credentials matter more than humanity, featured the moment when Dr. Okafor revealed her WHO and Johns Hopkins badges, followed by the visible shift in how she was treated by the crew. By the time the plane crossed the mid-Atlantic, these clips had been viewed over 3.2 million times. The hashtags #DroKaforStans and #FirstClassWhileBlack were trending globally, sparking intense discussions about race privilege and accountability in commercial air travel. In Global Atlantic Airways Crisis Management Center in Atlanta, executives had been jolted from their regular Sunday routines by urgent alerts. The company's social media monitoring system had flagged the rapidly spreading videos, triggering an emergency protocol reserved for major public relations threats. Current view count is approaching 4 million, and accelerating, reported Lydia Chen, the airline's head of digital communications. Comment sentiment is running 87% negative toward the airline, 92% negative toward the identified passenger, and 96% positive toward Dr. Okafor. CEO Jonathan Mercer, who had been called in from his daughter's soccer game, reviewed the footage with a deepening frown. "Do we have verification this occurred on one of our flights? Today, confirmed, sir. Flight 237 currently over the Atlantic. The purser filed an initial incident report about 90 minutes ago, but this footage is far more damaging than his summary suggested." "Who's the passenger making the discriminatory comments?" Victoria Kensington, Executive VP at BioCorp Pharmaceuticals. "Her husband sits on several corporate boards, including Westland Financial, which holds about 2% of our stock." Mercer's expression hardened. "And the doctor, Dr. Amara Okafor. Sir, she's essentially medical royalty. Chief of Pediatric Neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins, a WHO medical director for the Global Pediatric Surgical Initiative, Lasker Award winner. She's scheduled to deliver the keynote at the International Health Summit tomorrow." "Jesus Christ," Mercer muttered. "And our crew initially tried to move her to accommodate the racist passenger." "That appears to be the case." "Yes." Mercer turned to the airline's general counsel. "Nancy, what are we looking at here legally?" Nancy Goldstein didn't hesitate. "Potential discrimination lawsuit with significant damages." The footage clearly shows our senior staff attempting to accommodate discriminatory demands rather than addressing them. Dr. Okafor would have an extremely strong case if she chooses to pursue it. And beyond legal exposure, brand damage potentially severe. The videos are being shared by major influencers and picking up mainstream media attention. The narrative forming is that our airline prioritizes entitled racist passengers over distinguished black professionals. Mercer nodded grimly. "Options. We need immediate decisive action," Goldstein replied. "Not just standard corporate apologies, but concrete steps that demonstrate we recognize the seriousness of what occurred." "I agree," said Marcus Johnson, the airline's chief diversity officer. "This isn't just about one incident. It's exposing a pattern in how these situations are handled across the industry. If we want to distinguish ourselves, we need structural changes, not just crisis management." Mercer made a decision. "Contact the cockpit of Flight 237. I want to personally speak with the purser. Nancy, draft a public statement acknowledging what happened and outlining immediate actions. Marcus, I want a comprehensive review of our training protocols ready by tomorrow morning. And Lydia, prepare a social media response strategy that doesn't sound like corporate BS." As these emergency measures were being implemented, the online conversation continued evolving. Aviation blogs began analyzing previous discrimination cases on commercial flights, identifying patterns where airlines had moved the targets of prejudice rather than addressing those expressing it. Civil rights organizations issued statements calling for industry-wide policy reviews. Medical professionals shared their own experiences of being questioned or challenged in first-class cabins, despite their credentials. Victoria Kensington's name and face were becoming increasingly recognizable as the clips spread. Comments ranged from expressions of disgust to armchair psychological analyses of entitlement mentality. Some users had already identified her employer and were calling for her termination. BioCorp Pharmaceuticals, sensing a potential PR disaster, issued a hasty statement. We are aware of a video circulating online that appears to involve one of our executives. BioCorp is firmly committed to diversity and inclusion, and we are reviewing this matter with the utmost seriousness. Meanwhile, medical organizations were rallying around Dr. Okafor. The American Medical Association posted, "Dr. Amara Okafor represents the highest standards of our profession, both in her groundbreaking surgical work and her dignity in the face of discrimination. We stand with her and against all forms of prejudice in public spaces." Johns Hopkins Hospital went further. "We are appalled by the treatment our Chief of Pediatric Neurosurgery, Dr. Amara Okafor, experienced on a Global Atlantic Airways flight. Okafor has saved countless children's lives through her innovative surgical techniques. That she was subjected to such blatant discrimination is unacceptable and demands accountability." The World Health Organization also weighed in. "Dr. Okafor leads our global pediatric surgical initiative with unparalleled excellence. The incident she experienced reflects persistent barriers faced by medical professionals of color. We commend her composure and will support any action she deems appropriate in response." On board Flight 237, still hours from landing, the passengers remained largely unaware of how their mid-air drama had captivated the digital world. The aircraft's limited Wi-Fi meant only fragments of the growing story reached them. Jordan Reynolds received notification of his video's viral spread, but chose not to announce this to the cabin, understanding that the situation remained delicate until landing. In the galley jump seat, Victoria Kensington sat in uncomfortable isolation, checking her phone periodically, despite instructions to keep it off. The few messages that had come through before Air Marshal Diaz had enforced the no-phone rule had been alarming. Urgent texts from her husband about videos going viral, and a terse email from BioCorp's HR director requesting an immediate discussion upon landing. Dr. Okafor, focused on finalizing her keynote presentation, had no idea that she had become a symbol of resistance to discrimination. Dr. Wilson, now seated beside her, was engaged in a detailed discussion of their respective research fields, creating a bubble of normality amid the extraordinary circumstances. In row 3, Daniela Morales was making notes for a potential amicus brief in her ongoing discrimination case against another airline. This incident establishes a clear pattern of institutional response that prioritizes the comfort of those expressing prejudice over the rights of those experiencing it, she wrote. The footage provides unambiguous documentation of how airline personnel default to relocating targets of discrimination rather than addressing its source. As the plane continued eastward, the digital narrative raced ahead of it. By the time Flight 237 began its descent into Geneva, Victoria Kensington's name would be synonymous with entitled prejudice. Global Atlantic Airways would be drafting new company-wide protocols, and Dr. Amara Okafor would be welcomed not just as a distinguished medical speaker, but as someone who had struck a blow against the casual discrimination that pervaded supposedly elite spaces. The incident had transcended the confines of the aircraft to become something larger, a catalyst for conversations about race power and accountability that would continue long after the passengers had collected their luggage and gone their separate ways. As Flight 237 passed its midpoint over the Atlantic, a remarkable transformation had occurred within the first-class cabin. What had begun as a space of tension and conflict had evolved into something unexpected, an environment of genuine collegiality and respect centered around Dr. Amara Okafor. Dr. James Wilson, the pediatric oncologist from Mass General, who had been upgraded to the seat formerly occupied by Victoria Kensington, had quickly recognized Dr. Okafor's groundbreaking work. Their initial professional acknowledgement had blossomed into a vibrant discussion of recent advances in pediatric neurosurgery and oncology. "Your paper on minimally invasive access points completely changed my thinking on tumor accessibility." Dr. Wilson remarked, his enthusiasm evident despite his lowered voice. We've adapted some of your techniques for particularly complex solid tumors in our pediatric patients. I'm glad to hear that Dr. Okafor replied. The principles should translate well across specialties. Have you encountered any specific challenges with the approach? The vascular mapping can be tricky with highly perfused tumors, Dr. Wilson admitted. We've been experimenting with real-time fluorescence to better visualize the boundaries. That's fascinating. I'd love to see your results when they're published. Their conversation continued with the easy flow of colleagues who shared both expertise and purpose. Other passengers listened with interest, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that the two physicians answered with accessible explanations. So, in layman's terms, asked the elderly gentleman who had defended Dr. Okafor earlier, you're finding ways to remove tumors without damaging the healthy brain tissue around them. Exactly, Dr. Okafor explained with a warm smile. Think of it as creating a narrow, winding path through a dense forest to reach a specific tree, rather than clearing a wide road that damages the surrounding ecosystem. Remarkable, the man replied. My grandson had a brain tumor removed when he was 4. That was 30 years ago, and he lost some motor function on his left side. It sounds like children today have much better options. They do. Dr. Okafor confirmed, and that's why research collaboration is so vital. Every improvement in technique means more children retain full function after surgery. Victoria Kensington remained isolated in her jump seat near the galley, physically present but socially excised from the cabin's new dynamic. Her phone remained in her hand, though powered off as required a talisman of the connections and influence she could not currently access. A flight attendant approached her with a glass of water. Mrs. Kensington, can I get you anything else? The courtesy was professional but minimal. No special attention, no deference, just basic service. My usual champagne, Victoria replied automatically. I'm afraid alcohol service has been suspended for you for the remainder of the flight, the attendant informed her. Captain's orders. Victoria's face flushed with humiliation. This is ridiculous. I'm not drunk. It's standard protocol after a passenger disruption incident, ma'am. The attendant's tone was matter-of-fact, neither apologetic nor gloating. In the main cabin, Sofia Alvarez moved through with renewed confidence, her service now marked by genuine warmth rather than practiced deference. The shift in her demeanor was subtle but significant. She had found her voice during the confrontation and discovered that speaking truth had strengthened rather than diminished her position. Dr. Okafor, would you prefer the salmon or beef for your main course? She asked, her smile reaching her eyes. The salmon sounds perfect. Thank you, Dr. Okafor replied. And a glass of wine, perhaps. We have an excellent Chablis that would pair beautifully. That would be lovely, Sophia. Thank you. This simple exchange, marked by mutual respect rather than hierarchical service, represented a microcosm of the larger transformation occurring within the cabin. The invisible boundaries that had previously separated server and served had become more permeable, allowing for more human interaction. Michael Torres, observing this evolution, felt a complex mixture of emotions. His initial approach to the conflict, prioritizing Victoria's status over justice, now seemed not just wrong but fundamentally misaligned with his own values. The ease with which he had defaulted to accommodating prejudice rather than challenging it had revealed something uncomfortable about the professional persona he had cultivated over 20 years. When he approached Dr. Okafor with her meal, his manner was different. Less performatively deferential, more genuinely respectful. Your salmon, doctor. And the Chablis. Thank you, Michael, she replied, noting the change in his demeanor. He hesitated, then added quietly, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about the next passenger who doesn't have prestigious credentials. You were right. Our response shouldn't have depended on learning who you were. Dr. Okafor nodded, acknowledging both his admission and its significance. Recognition is the first step toward change. I've been doing this job for 20 years, Michael continued. I've moved dozens of passengers to accommodate complaints like Mrs. Kensington's. I never stopped to question whether I was enabling discrimination. I just called it customer service. It's a difficult position to be in, Dr. Okafor acknowledged. The institutional pressures to prioritize certain passengers' comfort are considerable, but not insurmountable, Michael replied with newfound resolution. Not if enough of us decide to do better. As the meal service progressed, Daniela Morales, the civil rights attorney, engaged several nearby passengers in a thoughtful discussion about the legal frameworks surrounding discrimination in commercial transportation. What's particularly interesting about aviation cases, she explained, is the intersection of federal anti-discrimination statutes with airline-specific regulations. The law is clear that airlines cannot accommodate discriminatory requests, but in practice, many flight crews default to moving the targets of discrimination rather than addressing those expressing prejudice. "Why is that?" asked the elderly gentleman's wife. "Training and incentive structures," Daniela replied. Flight attendants are evaluated on passenger satisfaction and conflict de-escalation. Moving someone who's being discriminated against is often the path of least resistance, especially when the person making discriminatory demands is a high-status passenger. This frank discussion of structural factors, happening openly in first class, where such topics were typically considered impolite, represented another dimension of the cabin's transformation. The pretense that social hierarchies were natural or invisible had been temporarily suspended, allowing for unusually direct conversation. Gabriel Martinez, monitoring the cabin from near the galley, maintained his professional demeanor, but his approach had subtly shifted. He checked on Dr. Okafor more frequently, ensuring her comfort without being intrusive. When he passed Victoria's jump seat, he was correctly attentive but no longer deferential. "Can I at least return to my original seat?" Victoria asked him during one such check. "This is humiliating. I'm sorry, Mrs. Kensington, but given the nature of the incident, it's best for everyone if the current seating arrangements remain in place until landing," Gabriel replied firmly. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You know this will cost you your job, right?" "My husband won't let this stand." Gabriel's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, I've been with this airline for 20 years. If standing up for what's right costs me my position, then perhaps it's time for a change anyway." As the flight entered its final hours, a sense of community had emerged among the passengers, the shared experience of witnessing an important boundary being established and defended. Conversations flowed more naturally across seat assignments, less constrained by the usual careful distance maintained among strangers in premium cabins. Sophia brought Dr. Okafor a cup of tea. "We'll be landing in about 2 hours, Doctor. Is there anything else you need to prepare for your keynote?" "This is perfect. Thank you," Dr. Okafor replied. "The tea is exactly what I needed. I just wanted to say," Sophia added quietly, "that many of us in the crew have been talking. What happened today? It's making us think differently about our responsibilities. So thank you for that as well." Dr. Okafor smiled a genuine expression of warmth. Sometimes standing firm in one place creates ripples far beyond that single moment. Sophia nodded, understanding the deeper truth in those words. "Exactly. That's exactly it." As Sophia moved away, Dr. Okafor gazed out the window at the vast Atlantic below. The confrontation had been draining in the way such incidents always were, requiring careful management of emotions and responses. But unlike many similar experiences throughout her career, this one had resulted in immediate accountability rather than delayed recognition or hollow apologies. That difference mattered not just for her immediate comfort, but for the precedent it established. Someone else might benefit from the boundary she had held firm today. Perhaps someone without WHO credentials or a position at Johns Hopkins, someone whose dignity would now be recognized as inherent rather than contingent on titles or affiliations. As Flight 237 continued its journey eastward, the transformed cabin represented a temporary but significant realignment of values. A space where excellence was recognized regardless of its packaging, where truth could be spoken across hierarchies, and where the usual constraints of social performance had been loosened by the clarifying experience of witnessing justice in action. 1 year after the incident on Flight 237, Dr. Amara Okafor found herself once again in the first-class lounge at JFK preparing for the annual International Health Summit in Geneva. The déjà vu was striking, yet everything had changed, not just in the airline industry but in how she was received in these premium spaces. Dr. Okafor greeted Anthony Richards, the lounge manager, with genuine warmth. "Your private room is ready. May I escort you?" "Thank you, but that's not necessary," she replied with a smile. "I'm comfortable in the main lounge. As you wish. Please let us know if you need anything at all." This deference wasn't new. Dr. Okafor had been recognized in medical circles for years, but its nature had shifted subtly. Before, such treatment had often carried an undercurrent of surprise or exception-making. Now it felt like a natural acknowledgement of her stature rather than an accommodation to it. As she settled into a comfortable chair overlooking the tarmac, she reflected on the year's developments. The Okafor initiative had expanded to 43 countries, bringing her revolutionary surgical techniques to regions where children with brainstem tumors had previously been given palliative care rather than curative options. Over 800 surgeons worldwide had been trained in her methods, and preliminary data showed survival rates increasing dramatically in participating hospitals. Professionally, the year had been her most productive. Free from the constant need to prove her legitimacy, she had published 12 papers, mentored 5 promising neurosurgery fellows, and performed 67 high-complexity surgeries with a success rate that had established new benchmarks in the field. Dr. Okafor. A voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Sophia Alvarez no longer in a flight attendant's uniform, but in the business attire of Global Atlantic's training department. "Sophia, what a wonderful surprise. I'm traveling to Geneva for the International Aviation Services Conference," Sophia explained. "I'm presenting our implementation data for the Dignity Protocol. Would you mind if I joined you for a moment?" "Please do," Dr. Okafor replied warmly, gesturing to the adjacent chair. Sophia sat down, her posture reflecting newfound confidence. "I wanted to thank you again. This past year has been transformative. Not just professionally, but personally." "I should be thanking you," Dr. Okafor countered. "You spoke up when it mattered despite the pressures to stay silent." Sophia smiled. "That one moment changed everything. Now I'm leading training sessions for senior staff who've been flying for decades. The protocol has been implemented across our entire fleet, and the data is remarkable. Reported discrimination incidents are down 71% company-wide, and when incidents do occur, they're addressed immediately rather than accommodated." "That's extraordinary progress," Dr. Okafor acknowledged. "The most significant change isn't in the numbers," Sophia continued. "It's in the culture. Flight attendants now feel empowered to address discriminatory behavior directly. We've established clear escalation procedures and eliminated penalties for confronting problematic passengers, even high-status ones." "How has passenger response been?" Sophia's expression turned thoughtful. "Mixed, but mostly positive. Some traditional premium passengers bristled initially at what they perceived as political correctness, but the vast majority appreciate flying with an airline that takes dignity seriously. Our premium cabin bookings among diverse travelers have increased 38% year over year." Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement. Global Atlantic Airways Flight 237 to Geneva is now boarding at Gate 12. Both women smiled at the coincidence. Same flight number, Sophia noted. Same destination, Dr. Okafor added. But a very different journey, I suspect. As they walked together toward the gate, Sophia updated Dr. Okafor on the fates of the other key players from last year's incident. Gabriel Martinez retired last month. The company threw him a celebration where he was recognized for his role in implementing the Dignity Protocol. Michael Torres completed the Advanced Bias Recognition Program and now serves as a peer counselor for crew members who've witnessed discrimination incidents. And Victoria Kensington. Sophia hesitated. I've heard some of what happened to her, Dr. Okafor said. The termination from BioCorp, the divorce. Yes. After losing her position and social standing, she eventually took an entry-level marketing role at a small company in Chicago. Someone who knows her said she's different now, quieter, less entitled. Whether that reflects genuine growth or just adaptation to reduced circumstances, I couldn't say. Consequences aren't the same as justice, but they can sometimes lead to reflection. They arrived at the boarding gate where Dr. Okafor was immediately recognized by the gate agent. Dr. Okafor, welcome. We are honored to have you flying with us again. We're ready to board you first whenever you're ready. Thank you, but I'm happy to board with my group. Sophia smiled at this response, recognizing that Dr. Okafor's refusal of special treatment was itself a statement about dignity and equality. When boarding was called, Sophia and Dr. Okafor parted with a warm handshake. Safe travels, Dr. Okafor. And thank you again for changing not just our airline, but our understanding of what's possible when someone refuses to accept discrimination. Safe travels to you as well, Sophia. Your courage made that change possible. As Dr. Okafor boarded the aircraft, the difference from a year ago was immediately apparent. The crew greeted her with natural respect rather than the exaggerated deference that had followed the revelation of her credentials during the previous incident. Her seat neighbor, a silver-haired European businessman, acknowledged her with a simple nod that assumed her belonging rather than questioning it. The first-class cabin felt different as well, more diverse in its occupants, more natural in its interactions. A young South Asian woman settled into 3A, an elderly black couple arranged their belongings in 4B and 4C, and a Middle Eastern man in traditional dress was welcomed warmly at 1D. This wasn't tokenism or coincidence. It was the visible result of an environment where everyone could expect equal treatment regardless of appearance. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Dr. Okafor gazed out the window at the sprawling airport. The incident that had occurred on this same route a year ago had been painful and unnecessary, the kind of experience she had navigated countless times throughout her career. But unlike many similar confrontations, this one had catalyzed genuine structural change rather than merely individual accountability. That difference mattered. It meant that the next Dr. Okafor, perhaps a brilliant young surgeon who didn't yet have prestigious credentials or global recognition, might board this same flight and be treated with dignity not because of who she was, but because of who she was recognized to be, a human being deserving of respect, independent of titles, achievements, or external validation. As Flight 237 lifted off the runway, Dr. Amara Okafor allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. The changes initiated by that difficult day weren't complete or perfect, but they were real and substantial. Sometimes holding firm in one place could shift the ground beneath an entire industry. Sometimes dignity defended became dignity expanded. Sometimes a single refused demand could lead to 1,000 affirmations of human worth. The aircraft climbed steadily through the clouds toward the clear blue beyond, carrying forward not just passengers and cargo, but the ongoing legacy of a moment when one person's quiet refusal to accept diminishment had created space for countless others to stand tall in their own right. If this story resonated with you today, I hope you'll take a moment to share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your experiences matter, and the boundaries you hold firm today might create ripples of change far beyond what you can see. Remember, true power isn't about controlling others or demanding special treatment. It's about standing firmly in your dignity, even when the world expects you to step aside. Don't forget to like this video if it moved you, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of everyday courage, and share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever stood your ground when someone questioned where you belong? We want to hear your story. Until next time, stay strong, stay dignified, and never underestimate the power of refusing to move when justice is on your side.